So, welcome everyone to this very special festive film thread bonus, which I'm going to be sending out to everyone, whether you are a paid member of the club or not, as a little thank you for all of your support this year. So, this is going to be dropping into your inboxes in what I believe we now must call Twixmas. So, hopefully, when you get this, you'll be nice and relaxed and full of festive cheer and in the perfect mood for a Christmas movie all about the end of the world. Yes, what better way to celebrate the holiday season and ring in the new year than with a nuclear apocalypse? That's exactly what happens in the atomic movie that I've got to share with you today, One Night Stand, which is a pretty obscure 1980s Australian Ozploitation film that is basically a mashup of a kind of rom-com and coming-of-age movie with a film about nuclear war. So it's quite a ride. And I am delighted to have a wonderful partner in crime joining me to talk about this kind of curious film. Beth Lisogorsky, who is a film and TV critic. I've written in Boston. I didn't check that with you. That's right? Boston, yeah.
Yes, close enough. Yes, Boston
That's the
area.
American Boston, not the Lincolnshire
Yes.
Boston. So Beth, thank you so much for doing this. Do you want to introduce yourself? Tell us about your Substack and who you are in the world.
Sure. Thank you so much, Vicky, for having me on. I'm excited to talk about this Australian Ozploitation film. My name is Beth Lisogorsky. I have the Substack You Need to Watch This. It was recently rebranded, formerly Best TV and Film Recommendations. You Need to Watch This is really aligned with kind of the energy I put forth in the Substack, where I give generally weekly recommendations on TV and film. And I call it a welcoming, non-judgy place for TV and film lovers. So I'm excited to add this film to the portfolio of films and to have the conversation with you.
Yeah, there's lots to get dug into. So what I thought I would do by the magic of technology, I'm going to play us the trailer and then we've got a little summary of the plot summary, which Beth is going to read for us. And then we're going to dive on into some of the juicy topics from this movie. So bear with me while I share my screen.
Going to be a war.
Whole U.S. Navy's known for months.
We repeat the signs again.
What is?
NATO and Warsaw
The war,
Pact are now locked in battle.
World War III!
All people in the greater Sydney area are to stay inside their houses.
How do you feel? Calm.
Well, I guess we should try and cheer them up. Have our own private party. Good luck.
Maybe one night left to live your whole life. One night stand.
But what about the radiation?
I know where there's some umbrellas. Would have died down by now.
Of doing is playing strip poker. It's pathetic. I suppose we should make the most of it in case.
Right.
Further information confirms that London, huge areas of central and southeastern England, and the industrial areas of France, including Paris, have virtually ceased to exist.
It's like the whole world's dead.
Maybe one night left to live your whole life. One night stand.
Right, so that is the trailer for this cool film. Beth, do you want to give us a bit of a summary of what it's all about?
Yes. So One Night Stand is a 1984 Australian film directed by John Digan. He's also the director of Flirting, which was an early Nicole Kidman movie, maybe even her earliest. and Sirens as well, that starred Hugh Grant and Elle Macpherson. Anyway, some background on the director. This is a very early film of his. It opens in the run up to Christmas with nuclear war protests, which were happening in Australia at the time, and a concert from legendary Aussie rock band Midnight Oil. And it follows 4 young people, 2 guys and 2 girls, 3 of them locals, and 1 is an American Navy sailor, who for various reasons end up in the Sydney Opera House on New Year's Eve. And news reports suggest that nuclear war may be starting overseas. So there's this kind of overriding tension and fear seeping into the group. Across the night, they're all sort of trapped together indoors, forced proximity trope. And they flirt, argue, drink, play strip poker, which was very interesting, as well as recall various snippets of their lives in flashback. They eventually learn that a full-scale nuclear war has broken out in Europe and North America, and that there has been tactical nuclear strikes on military targets in Australia. By morning, the sky over Sydney is turning red, and they flee with crowds of other people into the underground station. And the film ends on a very ambiguous note, and we're left uncertain as to the fate of these 4 people that we have gotten to know and possibly care about, and understand if Australia has been annihilated in the process. So I am curious, Vicky, we know this is mid-80s, it's Cold War. I had to do some kind of background factual checking as I was learning about, the presence of U.S. Navy ships in the harbor in Sydney at the time. This thinking about kind of the Soviets and U.S. Cold War fighting, obviously having some sort of presence or hold in Australia, which was an ally, was a critical piece. But I found kind of that backdrop historically and culturally, especially taking place in the 80s amidst like other riots and protests, like to be an interesting backdrop for our nuclear war threat that was happening in the film. What about you?
Yeah, I mean, it's 1984 is a kind of, which is the year that this film came out, is like a critical year, politically critical year in the world in the Cold War. It was like the second height, really. You had the 60s, the Bay of Pigs kind of era, and then there's this kind of a second super, heightened tension in the mid 80s under Reagan. And that is reflected in the movies. I actually did an event last year, which was called something like Nuclear War in Film and TV in mid 80s, cinema. And that was looking at a British film called Threads, which came out in 1984, which, if you've not seen that, is probably the most sort of horrifyingly bleak thing that you will watch. I mean, it's amazing. And in fact, there's little sort of sidebar, the people who made Adolescence, the big Netflix show,
yes,
are apparently remaking Threads, which has caused some sort of raised eyebrows because kind of Threads already exists and it was directed by Mick Jackson, who went on to do Bodyguard, British guy.
Yep.
First kind of film. He was still really like a BBC TV director then. There's a BBC TV movie, but it's a feature length, it's a movie. That came out in 1984, and that was the year after kind of what we would call that the American Threads is The Day After. Do you know The Day After?
Yep.
But yeah. And also another film, Testament. That was what this event I did, was Testament, The Day After, and Threads. When I was looking there, that those are not the only ones. There was another famous animation in the UK, When the Wind Blows, which follows a nuclear bomb going off in Sussex. It's animated, but it's an elderly couple living not far from me. Raymond Briggs, who wrote that, lived in Sussex, where I live. So yeah, this was a kind of era in which the nuclear threat was very high for real in the world, but it was reflected in popular culture. And one of the things that was interesting when I was looking at this, I didn't know about this film at all. Full disclosure, I was just looking sort of slightly not as a joke, but just I thought kind of, since I've been doing this like season on, atomic movies, wouldn't it be, a little fun, quirky little kind of gift to my subscribers to have an atomic Christmas movie? So I was kind of seeing what Christmas movies there might be, if there were any. And I found this one, and it was pretty, it's quite a find.
It definitely did not feel like Christmas, this movie.
No, I
Like
mean,
I could
partly it's
see,
that's the Australian thing, isn't it? Because
that's
obviously
right.
it's the summer, right? It's
Right. In terms of
yeah,
the season, yeah, it's warm and stuff. So you're right. I also just felt like, to me, this was like, it almost was like a rom-com set in, like, the with the backdrop again of just sort of this serious nuclear threat and
it
end of
kind
the
of felt
world
like
kind
those
of
kind of
apocalypse.
Brat Pack, John Hughes kind of 80s teen movies, didn't it? Had that sort of
Yeah.
vibe. Um, it was also for me like I don't know if you're familiar with the now literally just last week sadly finished for the second time, well actually for the third ever time, but the Australian soap opera Neighbours, which I'm a huge fan of. That launched the same year or possibly the year after, but that kept, I was watching this thinking like this is the Australia in which Neighbours was launched, this kind of mid 80s
Yeah.
Australia. There's another film that I
Well,
found a couple of years later. It's set in Melbourne, which is
yeah.
in the aftermath of a bomb. So this is the kind of like sickening tension as is the bomb coming, which is like the beginning of Threads. Half of Threads is before the bomb, and then the second half is after the bomb, and the unfoldingly horrific, it goes on many many years into the future after the bomb, and it's terrible. But this Melbourne film apparently that's a black comedy by all accounts, so I might have to check that one out as well. But this was what
Yeah.
did you think of watching it? It's a funny one, isn't it? It's kind of, as I was watching it, I was kind of like, what sort of is this? Because like tonally, it's like it sort of feels like one film sort of bolted onto the bits about the nuclear stuff feel quite
Mhm.
serious. It starts out like with a proper sort of anti-nuclear march, and Midnight Oil are a very very political band.
Yeah.
And
Oh
that was a
yeah.
real concert apparently that they filmed, and that song that they're singing, Short Memories, is a very political, it's a real song, which I guess was not by accident. That's the film. Apparently there was another song from their same album that was more pointed in its kind of criticism of the US. And I read some Australian commentators or whatever, reviewers on Letterboxd and places saying, oh, see, well, I forget what the name of the song was, but I can see, well, they didn't go so far as to use that particular track, but this the one that they did use was still quite on the nose. So, and then
Yeah.
obviously the all the bits every time you go back to, and that's a sort of real trope of all of these films, isn't it? That it's the sort of building tension. I mean, Threads does this. It's on to begin with, it's just in the background, it's just the main protagonists are just kind of ignoring it, but it's on the TV in the background, and it does all of that. But then there's this kind of scene relatively late in the film, where one of the characters manages to get a TV working and just turns on, and they cut to just basically like Armageddon in sort of somewhere north of New York, and it's like really quite graphic, brutal scenes of you know people burning and women and
That's
babies
right.
dying, and that feels very serious. I mean, that feels like it could have come straight out of The Day After or something. But then
It
within
does. I think,
like
yeah.
strip and
I know. And those scenes were like, I can't even, and one of the main characters, I think it was Eva, like she sees that and after she, towards the end of the film where she sees like these horrific images of
yeah,
people's faces being burned off and she can't sort of unsee it. And she's having a hard time. Like it's interesting. This movie exists on like sort of a coming of age, like romance, like you said, like kind of the John Hughes-esque, right? Like, you kind of think like the Breakfast Club, these
yeah,
four like, characters. And it definitely gets infused with a lot of seriousness because there's the interplay of like all these moments in life that they may never have, right? Like they're kind of one of them, they couple off and Sharon, I think, is grouped with a guy named Brandon. Not the brightest bulb, but like, decides to have sex with him. And you kind of sense like, she's like, oh, what the hell? We might as well just have sex. And they do it. And it's like, in some ways it's because this could be the end of things and like nothing really matters anymore. Right. And so I thought some of their decisions and the spontaneity and the impulsivity is like, anyways, at that age, I think they're supposed to be like late teens, maybe, like it's really ramped up. And I sense that putting this with kind of, again, like with, the nuclear threat and end of world, that it just, doubled the stakes on everything, exponentially, that they were acting in ways that were funny and maybe like typical of their age, but also
yeah.
kind of pushed to extremes that maybe they wouldn't have done if the world wasn't ending, right?
That kind of the recklessness of youth, but combined with that, there's, in a way, the stakes are as high as they could possibly be, but in a way there's no stakes at all, because there's not going to be, as I said, that if there's not going to be a tomorrow. And then when
they can play out any of that stuff today. And I think the other thing I wanted to talk about, given that, right, they're like hanging out at the Sydney Opera House, right? Like the whole time.
I mean, what a location. I've never seen inside the Sydney Opera House, to be honest. I've only ever seen it in exterior. And that is the real Sydney Opera House. They did film on location. Not they didn't film the entire film, but they did film substantial parts of it in there. So you're seeing the real location. It's kind of amazing. And it's what a location for that as well, because it's, you couldn't really in a way think of anything more surreal and almost like unreal than a nuclear war. It is that it's sort of, I've been looking at a lot of films about nuclear stuff over the last 6 months, and it's this constant thing of like, how do you depict the sort of undepictable, the unimaginable? And he sort of goes with that, doesn't he? Because the film is like suffused with all this like theatricality and weird sort of fantasy bits that are even you're like not even sure are they really true. Like there's a sort of troupe of, at one point the American sailor he just like goes into the King Lear speech, and then this sort of troupe of Shakespearean players in like full kind of Elizabethan garb just walk past. And there's another bit where the guy just suddenly appears he's playing a grand piano, and you're like, are these people real? Are they really there? And then the one we talked about, the strip poker, they're all dressed up, or the girls get dressed up in like Alice in Wonderland sort of Mad Hatter costumes, and that's on one level that's just paid for a laugh, isn't it? Because the guys are just there in their very quickly their underwear, and the girls are there in like full on, the Queen of Hearts kind of like layer on layer. But also it's very this kind of whole layer of artifice, and there is literally a rabbit that they keep seeing. And again, like, is it on the one? It plays naturally like it's a real rabbit, and they're like, oh yeah, that must be part of the show. But then it just keeps kind of appearing in different places in a way that
it does. I think we need to rewatch it to understand if there's any symbolic significance of that rabbit showing up in different places. But the other thing is, I noted like in the mix of all of it, they brought us like, I think they were watching, was it Frankenstein?
Oh, it was
some point,
it's Metropolis. It's Fritz Lang's Metropolis.
Oh, that's right. The scene, because I was like, okay, where's this coming from? Yeah, that was an interesting scene, just that they're sitting there watching these things. So I liked that they kind of created this mini world inside this like very like ripe environment of the Sydney Opera House and the theater, and made use of like the costumes and the stage, and like
they're like speaking over the talk back, aren't they, from the up in the kind of gallery down to the stage. And it's sort of, it's like they're in their own this sort of wonderland, isn't it? It becomes it's like they're in this little bubble that they've created for themselves that's constantly, but not constantly, but it keeps being punctured by this like worsening, increasingly bad news coming from the outside. And you get the sense, which I guess makes sense in terms of the plot, that the American guy, the sailor, is the one who takes it the most seriously, which obviously makes sense because he's left the boat because he's worried about a real war happening. Whereas the others, it feels like until quite late on, probably until Eva character, as you say, sees those horrific scenes, they haven't really, they sort of talk about, it'll be all over by morning, and then they go out, and that's the amazing scene where they go out with the umbrellas onto the roof of the opera house at midnight to see, I guess they would be expecting all the fireworks and all of the huge like thing for New Year's Eve, and there's just nothing, there's just silence. And you get the sense that at that point they're starting to go, oh, okay. And then I can't remember, I think it might be the sailor, because they're literally out there. They don't know really whether, that's another thing, compared to those other nuclear war films I've watched, the ones, set like Threads. Those are set, they use that phrase, in the theatre of war. They keep talking about the nuclear theatre, which is a real term, obviously, for war, but it has an extra layer in this film with all this theatricality. But in this film, it's kind of like on the 50s film On the Beach when they're in Australia. They're very geographically very, very distant, far distant from where these bombs, or at least they think they are. Obviously later on that starts to break down, and we learn that there's, as you said, that we know that the naval boats were there and there are these military bases. But for a lot of the film, it's kind of like this awful thing is happening, but it's like quite, it's far away from them. It's far away from anything that they can imagine. It's literally on the other side of the world, and it's so like mind-blowingly like you can't even imagine it, that they just sort of don't try to engage with it. I guess they're just kind of, and they're young. They're just,
Yeah.
they're
Feeling
just
of
thinking about like who's
invincibility
going to
and
get
like
to
living.
die. Yeah,
Yep. I have to say, there's some things about this film. Like, I think there's some bold choices in some ways. Yeah, I think there was like some tonal choices of like unevenness of things, and where I felt the most unevenness were the scenes that went into flashbacks.
Yeah.
Because I think they were supposed to paint emotionally pictures of our main four characters: Brandon, Sharon, Eva, and Sam, the sailor, the American. And they just made me kind of like, they almost like took attention away from what was going on to like step back in time,
Weren't
maybe
enough,
remember
were
these
they? They
people
were a
had a
bit half
story.
caught between. Like they
No,
weren't enough to fully really invest in the people.
no,
It was sort of
no.
too much to make them just these sort of for every teen or whatever. They
That's right.
personalized.
At some point, Sharon, I think there's like when they're sitting playing strip poker, Eva says to Sharon, it might even be after that, like when they're already done, but she says something like, "Oh yeah," almost kind of bitingly. She's like, "Nothing ever seems to affect you. You're always right, Sharon, always." And then they show a scene in Sharon's past where like her ex breaks up with her, and it's like such an emotionless scene that I felt like really and then she's seen going into her bedroom upset and kind of losing, her face kind of breaking character of being strong or something. And it's like, okay, that like 10-second blip did not tell me what I needed to know, that you don't always have your stuff, that you're not always emotionally in control. But like, and then I think where this place shines too is there was I wrote them down, just some fun, quippy dialogue where like very deadpan, Brandon's like, "I could be a maniac." And Sharon goes, she's kind of the smart ass, and she's like, "Sure, you got a chainsaw up your shirt, And I thought like some of the interplay with Sharon kind of being the more like funny person compared to Eva being kind of the more serious. And obviously we see like in flashbacks, like she had been an immigrant, I think, in her had been bullied at some point, and Sharon kind of like took her on as friend, and that's where they had connected initially, like at school. And then Sam the sailor had a backstory where he was American. Apparently his mom burped a lot at the table at the dinner table, which we were had indigestion.
Flashbacks, weren't they? And I had assumed that the girl, so we keep seeing him with a girl, and I thought she was meant to be like a girlfriend, but then I read a few people who had thought it was his sister. So
I thought it was his girlfriend too. I thought they were sort of romantic together. I don't know if I saw them kiss, but I feel like there's.
I agree with you about the flashbacks. The only thing that I did feel was sort of that did work for me, was a bit more poignant, was just the physical places. So there's because we know the flashbacks of of New York and Paris, just the cities, the cityscapes, in the context of knowing that I can't remember the chronology of which happens when, but at one point that basically. London, the whole of most of southeastern England, the industrial parts of northern France, including Paris, like I think she says to all intents and purposes, like they've ceased to exist or something. And the same with with New York, then we do actually see this kind of hellfire, sort of unimaginable scene. But I feel like you could have just done that with them, because these flashbacks, I guess they played like that kind of like randomness, which that was quite true to life, I suppose, with how memory works. Is just like somebody says something and you randomly remember some like connected thing. But it's
a good point. It is a good point.
They were trying to make those into fleshing the characters out, but they didn't succeed for that, because they were too brief and too kind of odd.
That's right.
Like the burping mum and the ice dating like girlfriend.
Yes. 100%. And I do like that idea that you just said about like, when you do remember things, it is fleeting, right? It's like this like half-second scene that you play in your mind that just triggered one thing, right? Like it could have happened 10 years ago, 15 years ago. And so maybe that was a director's choice to kind of like evoke that, but it just fell flat as far as the whole arc of the story. And
well, they didn't add anything, did they? Because nothing paid off, or we didn't know them as fully rounded characters, and it didn't feel like we needed to. Like the whole point was that they're just young people, they're the next generation, and they're their future is potentially just wiped out in an instant, and all of the kind of trivial things that is part of, we were talking before we started recording about the COVID pandemic, and
Yeah.
all of those kind of the stuff of being a teenager, that suddenly that's just taken away. And so it doesn't matter, they don't need to be like fully fleshed out individuals that we care about on an individual level for that to work. And in fact, if anything, it's more powerful if you don't really know that much about them as individuals.
Yeah.
The other thing also,
I think it's more of a
bit,
moment time, like meeting them in that moment of time. And I do think like the director, and maybe this just shows that he was early on in his career and experimenting with things more, is just, I think he was trying to find that balance of like just how much you need to know about these people. Like he wanted us to care about them. And to your point, they represent sort of the next generation, and this is a generation that the world might end with them, right? And so I think like that's another piece that's sort of an interesting thing, but I just don't think we needed to see some of those backstories. It wasn't where this movie really shined. But
the best bits were just those scenes, all of the different scenes, with them dancing on the stage, or like when they were dressing up, they're just like raiding the costumes and just kind of like running riot. They've got the run of the Sydney Opera House. It's kind of wild, and all of that stuff. And like you said, the dialogue and the banter, that was all really fun and quite sort of immersive. It did feel quite jarring, but then I sort of afterwards and reflecting about it, I was like, I'm gonna guess maybe that was on purpose, because it is so jarring. Like in reality, I suppose that is, we're all just living, life is busy life in, and then whenever God help us that it never happens, but if a bomb goes off, it's just happening in the middle of ordinary life. It doesn't, and especially for ordinary people, for civilians, and especially for people like who are not even in the theater of war, as they keep referring to it. That's our life now, isn't it? We live with the backdrop of the drumbeat of news and perma crisis and things going on, but you still just get up and you go to work and you hang out with your friends and you just do what you're doing, and that would be how it would be, I suppose.
I do think the difference here is that there's like, going back to your COVID comment, there is like a perma threat that the world is ending, right? And so that is sort of an imminent danger that is, there all the time for these people, even though they're kind of going about, to your point, living life, because what are they going to do until that exact moment? And we don't know in the subway when it's lights out at the end, is that it? Like, is that it for these people? And and I didn't feel like the ending to me didn't feel as dramatic as it could have been, because I think, and in a good way, I think the director like throughout sort of paced us for a place of like, this is the inevitability of it. And really it's about kind of living in these moments with these characters and being uncomfortable that this is where everything is leading, but like that it's going to lead there. Like, I don't think there was ever a place in this film where I'm like, it's not going to end with disaster. Like,
you didn't think, they might get out of this alive.
No. And I don't know that I needed them to. Like a lot of films, I feel like I could maybe not say that, but with this, I was like, it did a really good job of showing us these people in a place of time under this horrendous like end of world situation, with that, and just telling a story of these characters and not necessarily needing that to be more than that, right? So anyway, I think it succeeded on that level, even though I will say, like, watching it, I had to watch it in a few different stints of like like this is a lot to take in with some of like the fantasy, like theatrical elements. It's not totally my bag.
It's interesting so what you were saying like, about him being early in his career. Maybe he was just kind of, I think he was like, get the sense it was probably a pretty low, but I was reading that he'd pitched the script to, I mean, I never heard of this company, but like an Australian, I guess like media mogul or whatever, who was like, yes,
who right away was like, I want this, right? So he got good support. I don't know what that translated, to your point, to like budget and numbers, but I do think
it cost some money to film in the Sydney Opera House, but it definitely felt like maybe that they must have had some resources, but it felt low budget in that kind of spirit of like artistic freedom or whatever. It didn't feel
that's like right, art house.
It didn't feel like there was a big studio behind him, dictating. And also, I mean, I don't think any of those actors were like big names or anything like that.
No, although one of the actresses, because I'm like very invested in these kind of stories of real life behind the scenes, one of the actresses, the one who played Sharon.
Yeah.
She went on to marry John Denver.
Yeah. But
Random.
briefly and not very happily by the sounds of things. Yeah.
I know. I needed to find out more about that relationship. But yeah, apparently he had some choice words about her.
Yeah.
And then I didn't realize Crowded House was an Aussie band. I for
Oh,
some
yeah.
reason had thought they were.
Actually, so I loved Crowded House when I was a teen. I mean, I still
Yep.
now, but I went to see them several times when I was a teenager. And I was looking out. So apparently Paul Hester is there, the drummer is
Yes.
there uncredited. I didn't spot him.
Where is he?
Yeah,
I didn't see
go
him
back and
either.
see.
I was going to
Maybe
say that was
that's the sort of challenge to anybody else who obviously I'll link where you can go and watch this movie online. But if anybody can spot the Crowded House drummer, I mean, presumably
I
he might
know.
have been at the Midnight Oil concert, I guess, but I don't know.
I was thinking that too. I was like, I think I need
Like
to
one
go
of the
back to
random,
those.
you know, was he? And I don't know what he looks like really, so I don't. I could look. I'd have to look him up. Um, I don't.
I discovered what he looked like, and then I was like, okay, he was young. He would have been young here.
Oh
So
yeah,
like
yeah.
some of the
I think he may have passed away. One of the members of Crowded House quite sadly died.
he committed suicide, unfortunately.
Right.
Yeah, like a long time ago. But yeah, I'm gonna go back and kind of see where he is in this because I also wait. I was saying if I could find anything online, but yeah, I'll search for it myself if I
Just
come
think
up
about
with
the
anything.
budget thing. Like Midnight Oil were a big band, so to get
Yes.
but a very political band. So yeah, there was not a huge amount. I couldn't find. I found lots of fan comments which were fun to read, especially from like Australian viewers.
Yeah.
Because apparently like one of the newsreaders was like a big famous Australian newscaster who would have been the person. I mean that's the same in Threads. Like there's a newsreader who was a BBC or ITV newsreader I was a kid in the 80s, but I recognized her like from the TV.
Yeah.
She was the real newsreader. And that's they do that in lots of shows, don't they? They use the real reporter.
Yeah.
But that is going to hit home, isn't it? If you're like a kid who grew up and you recognize that person. But yeah, I was able to find a huge amount like actually written about the film. I don't think I guess it didn't go anywhere really, despite having had this like producer behind it. It seems like it didn't do very well.
It's an interesting choice for a name of film.
Yeah,
I like that
I don't think it's a great title because it just sounds like any. I mean, there are other films by that title as well. It doesn't tell you anything about kind of the features of what would make you want to watch this film. Well, like if you're into kind of a rom-com or a teen, movie, it's got a lot of those things in it.
Yeah.
And also, obviously, if you're interested in sort of apocalypse things, it's totally got all of those things. They kind of yoke together in a slightly odd way. But I think if you're into either of those things, you might like something in this film. But you wouldn't know from the title really those things.
I think the whole thing is like that. It's like I thought of like taking a stand or something against like maybe like nuclear energy. Yeah, but it's like one of those. I've my Substack used to have a title like that where nobody understood it but myself, and I'd have to explain it to people. I realized that's when it's not the right title. But as nuclear war breaks out, they've got one night to live for the rest. One night to live the rest of their life. So like that's kind of the tagline for the movie. I'm just looking at the movie poster,
better than the title, isn't it? But
it's better than the title. Yeah,
I think notoriously hard though to give him his due.
I understand that. That's fair. And the tagline, I actually think the movie art and poster are phenomenal. So I hope you post it in your
we will do,
in your write up. Yeah.
And I don't think the cast went on to do too much, did they? The American guy has become he's American Australian, so he's become a dialect coach, sort of coaching Australians in doing a decent American accent. So that was kind of interesting, and probably vice versa, maybe, which is I think would probably just based on the movie accents I've heard, I would guess that it's harder for an American to do a convincing Australian accent than it is the other way around. I
think and I'm looking at the director. I mean, he did have a lot of films in the 90s.
Sirens was a pretty big film, wasn't it?
Sirens was a big film, and I thought Flirting, I mean, that was early 90s. That was a pretty big deal as far as like a lot of catapulting a lot of those actors into success later on. I mean, it was I think in addition, Thandie Newton was in it as well. She was the other main character. Yeah. So, and then, yeah, I mean, Wide Sargasso Sea is the only other one I've heard of from his repertoire that's showing up, which I remember watching as well. But that one was also early 90s and it was erotic thriller. I just remember it being kind of a big deal at the time, at least US when it came out, and it getting a lot of sort of theatrical buzz. But yeah, I would say that the main person that seemed the sad story was the woman that played Eva, who seemed to have passed away, also kind of relatively young. I think it was like cardiac related, but she was in a film, if you can believe it, like a punk film a couple years after this with Michael Hutchins, right? From
that was another famous this Ozploitation.
Yes,
which I knew about Ozploitation, but I don't think I'd ever sort of knowingly watched one. But when I was reading about them, especially on the, like I was saying on the IMDb and Letterboxd, there's a big long list of Ozploitation films, and I think it would be kind of fun. And yeah, that is it. Dogs in Space or Space?
Yes, I think that is what it's called. Yeah, and that's the one she was known for.
Fun rabbit hole to go down. I think maybe some of these movies.
Yes, I think so too.
This is a kind of pretty strange and quirky thing to have watched.
It is. Very much so. And I never would have watched it if you had not said, Beth, we're watching this film.
No.
And I was like, sure, I'm on board. I mean, you got me at like romance. And so I was,
I think it's like, when I read it and I was like, oh, it's sort of double date at the, in a nuclear apocalypse. I was like, who loves like romances?
I'm doing that. So I will always sign up for that. The weird thing, okay, I have to ask, and then I unfortunately have to, get going shortly because I feel like I could talk about this film forever. But one of the things, so in the beginning when they're double dating, and our main characters are obviously the two women, Sharon and Eva, like they're double dating, and one of the guys is the guy that they end up hanging out with of the foursome. But the other guy is not, right? They ditch him. Is that right?
Well, so they both go up to the early part of the film after they've been to the Midnight Oil concert. So how it starts is that the two guys are Santas. They're dressed up in full Santa costumes, which as a sort of Northern Hemisphere, right? It's kind of weird seeing even though I'm familiar with that. Obviously, I know that Australia has Christmas in their summer.
Yeah.
But it's just kind of weird to me to see all the guys out. Everyone's out in Sydney Harbour in their kind of and let the girls are on the beach later, and then the guys come out in their full Santa. But then they go on this double date with them to Midnight Oil, and they go back to their apartment. But then the girls kind of like ditch them and send them out behind their ear. And one of the guys, is it his bike or his car? I think it's his car gets towed, and he's like, it's kind of see of him. The last we see of him is kind of going, no, like there's still someone in here. I think it's his car. I think he's in the car.
Okay,
I'm not remembering that, but he gets kind of like towed away. And we don't ever see him again. And then in the Sydney Opera House, it's Brandon is a cleaner because he's told them that he's a singer. So Sharon is an usher or an usherette there.
That's right.
She's
usherette, yeah.
Eva's just her friend, so she's coming to meet her to go, I guess, to like a New Year's party after she finishes her shift.
Yep.
Brandon is not in fact a singer, he's just a cleaner, so they bump into him there. And then the American guy who becomes our fourth kind of main character is he's just like hiding out in there trying to not get busted by his superiors because he's gone AWOL.
A defector.
A bit odd, isn't it? Because before I'd watched the film and I was sort of pitching it to you, I had assumed it was just like two couples, but this is like slightly odd. The poor first guy, because they're like, what happened to him when the nuclear?
I know.
He's still.
I don't know. Like I feel like in true like film fashion, scrappiness. Actor probably got like sick or something. I don't know. And then they had to like recreate this because the Navy guy, I really, for whatever reason, of all the characters in this film, I liked him the least. And he kind of bugged me. And then I was trying to
funny. He didn't have the same good like Aussie humor as the other guys.
He just fell flat to me. And he was like supposed to be more serious and kind of bringing in more of the threat indoors, I found. But then he was also trying to like hook up with one of the women. And I don't know, the whole thing was just, I found that to be very like, I don't know. I wanted the other guy.
He was definitely, I agree. I feel like if it had been those two guys at the beginning, the two Santas, that would have felt more satisfying. But maybe it was, he was trying to bring in that sort of political, that's the whole thing all the way through this tension. he was trying to work out, how do you do that? How do you yoke together a sort of teen rom-com and a serious nuclear war film? And he had a good go at it. I don't know.
Yeah, apparently bringing in the sailor was the first solution to that.
Maybe he didn't. Maybe he didn't need to, but
But yeah, I think it was an definitely ambitious undertaking. As well. Like I found all the different, the political, like existing on a political, the social, cultural, like moment. I feel like like you were saying, Threads was a film that they're thinking of remaking. And I was like, I cannot imagine them ever remaking this film. I mean, obviously for a bunch of reasons, it probably didn't do as successfully as Threads and other films, but I also just feel like it's so much of its time that to try to give it a modern update would fall flat, I was thinking
the young people are they're sort of quite naive in a way, aren't they? It's sort of, today's, you just feel like everybody now, like we swim in this world of like social media news and constant updates. They feel like they're kind of very disconnected from, they're just doing their thing, like they're cut off. And I don't know if you could sell that with young people now. It would be believable probably that they would just know nothing about it or not really, I don't know. And
although Australia did, they did ban social media, right, for under 16.
True. So yeah, maybe in like 10 years' time, the current kids will be sufficiently like unaware of all the horrors that are going on that they could do it.
That's
again.
Right. Oh, that's right. So yeah. Well, anyway, Vicky, it has been lovely.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
And I should say Merry Christmas and Happy New Year to everyone watching this, and Merry Christmas to you in anticipation.
Happy New Year and Merry Christmas, and I'm happy that I got to be a part of this discussion because it's such a quirky, weird film. And now I'm going to another film screening tonight, and I'm like, I'll have this one in my backdrop, so I'll be thinking about
there's a lot of images, isn't there? There's definitely some images that are going to fully stay in my mind from this movie. And it does make 100%. Me go to Sydney and go and have if I ever was to go to Australia and go inside the Opera House and go on a tour, how would I not have the images of those kind of minstrels and the weird rabbit and everything, and the strip poker on the stage?
That's right. I'm like, you're like, you will demand this type of experience. You'll be like, this is what I was sold in this film, and I need to have this. And I bet you if you like bring up that film, you might have somebody that like takes, I don't want to say pity. It's not pity is not the word, but has compassion and says, oh my gosh, like you're a fan of this. I'm a fan as well. And then, you have this wild adventure and it stokes the flames for your next, documentary or film. We'll see.
Who can say? Well, on that bombshell. Thank you so much. And
Thank you.
See you again on Substack and beyond.
Yes. Thanks for having me, Vicky. This was lovely. It's good to get to know you.